He may even identify himself with it and believe that he is what he appears to be.
Welcome back to the NCE Study Guide podcast. I'm Glenn Osland, and over the next several episodes, I'll be sharing a series of listener essays that were originally submitted to another podcast that I co-created back in 2012 called Infants on Thrones. Now, that show began as a space for people exploring life after Mormonism. It's actually one of the main reasons why I went back to school to become a therapist. And over the years, listeners shared some incredibly thoughtful, vulnerable, and often funny reflections about their own journeys. So in this series, we'll revisit some of those essays as case studies for NCE prep and deeper reflection on the principles and process of therapy itself. Like all other modules in this podcast, I'm putting this together as part of my own continuing education, a way to keep learning, growing, and reinforcing key counseling concepts while sharing that process with you. So, settle in for what I like to call an AI puppet show, featuring a resurrected listener essay from Infants on Thrones, followed by some AI-assisted commentary from Notebook LM. And if you like this sort of thing and you want to hear more of it, come check out what I'm doing over at Infants on Thrones. Now, enjoy the show.
Baby steps.
After your faith hasn't let you down.
This is Infants on Thrones.
I'm looking for the further light and knowledge Father promised to send me.
Baby step, baby step.
Look for the good in everyone.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Osland, a licensed therapist and certified life coach. And over the 13-year history of this podcast, we've shared a lot of listener essays, stories, reflections, and deeply personal explorations from you, the audience. And I've decided it's time to bring some of those voices back to life, to dust them off and, well, resurrect them. We'll call it the morning of the first resurrection. After all, resurrection is really about healing, restoring the body, mind, and soul to their most pristine, integrated state. So I thought, what if we could use modern tools like ChatGPT and Notebook LM to create a kind of AI puppet show? A thoughtful, playful deep dive into the mental health layers underneath these listener essays. Now, I'm creating this series for two audiences, primarily. First, for students studying for the National Counselor exam to help you explore these stories as real-world case studies. And second, for anyone who's ever wrestled with similar experiences to help you see the psychological and emotional insights that might apply to your own life. So, it's my pleasure to share these resurrected essays with you, renewed, reimagined, and ready for reflection. All right? Are you ready? Hold on to your hats and glasses.
'Cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
I threw my first log on the fire when I was 12. I was called to be in the Beehive presidency, and I was so proud. There are many girls that could have been chosen, but Joy Allison chose me to be her counselor. What a privilege. I got to go to extra meetings, be in charge, spend more time with Sister Caroline, and I got a really awesome binder with all the other girls' phone numbers in it, including my best friend's number. I still have it memorized. She was in my ward too, but not in the Beehive presidency. I must have been just a hair bit better than her. I don't know how or why I was better than her, but I must have been for Heavenly Father to tell Joy Allison to pick me and not Chris. My dad, also a privileged individual, was the bishop. He had thrown many logs on the fire. Although he hadn't been doing it his whole life, he had many years, mostly during his teens and early 20s, that he had lived in the dark. He took a break from keeping his fire going, and he always felt bad about that. The few pictures of him and my mom during that time in their life looked like they were having a great time. Kayaking, fishing, education, lots of friends. But apparently they had to get back on track and throw logs so God would bless them with kids. From age 12 to 16, I threw lots of logs on my fire. Mostly when people were watching, not great big ones, but enough to get the praise from adults telling me how great my fire was burning. The praise felt good and I was warm. During my teenage years, I watched my dad throw an enormous burn all night log on his fire when he would go every morning at 5 a.m. as he headed off to bishopric meeting. Oh, such a privilege. He couldn't talk about what he did there, and he had to limit the note-taking he did on his hand. He fell into bed early every night, dead to the world. I would sometimes crawl in bed with him just so I could spend some time with him. He never turned me away, even though he was beat. I would talk his leg off. He would say, uh-huh. I'm pretty sure he didn't hear a word I was saying, except when he had his daddy spidey sense telling him that I was neglecting my fire. Then he would talk for hours about how important it is to keep your fire burning. A fire is the only way you will make it in the cold, dark world. Think deep, he'd say. Of course, it was the art of fire building that he wanted me to think deep about. Prayer, scripture reading, fasting. If I had questions, he always had the answers. Throw another log on the fire. Have you taken that problem to the Lord, sis? My mom's fire was glowing bright yellow. She loved throwing logs on. Always cheerful, crackling fire she had. She had devoted her whole life to keeping her fire burning and helping all of us keep our flames going. She not only helped us, she ignited fires all around her. 11-year-old boys, girls camp girls across the whole valley, Relief Society women, and especially the ladies lucky enough to call her their visiting teacher. My mom knew everyone, and every time she saw them, she asked how their flame was doing. Fires are really all she knows how to talk about, but she does crackle cheerfully. Fire building became big business when I moved away from my parents' glow and married Paul. Paul's fire was actually smoldering when I married him. I didn't know this, so now it became my job to keep both of our fires ablaze. Throwing logs on two fires is a lot of work. Sometimes I would get mad and tell him to be in the cold then. You know what it takes to keep your fire burning. If you're not going to do it for yourself, then freeze. But then a big problem came that made it so I couldn't let his fire go out. Kids! Yikes! I had to keep his fire burning. So I would throw a log on my fire, then chuck a log on his. It was harder to throw from a distance, but kids, you know. Little did I realize keeping two fires burning would be so much work. Sometimes the fires would be really far apart and I would have to throw a log on mine and then run a long ways to reach Paul's to throw a log on it. It did help that Heavenly Father kept giving me big jobs, really big ones, so the logs were heavy and burned a long time. They were hard to throw and my muscles sometimes got weak. I often envied my sister's fire. It was a huge flame, and her husband's fire was really close to hers, so they could throw logs on each other's fire. Wow, 2 bonfires! Oh yeah, not to forget the super long-lasting source of heat and light, coal, which you can buy for only 10%, pre-tax of course. Paul was really against this, but I persisted and won, as usual. I bought more coal than I ever needed just to save up in case something bad happened. And then there was the super duper sacred, not secret place where I could go and get super duper logs. I tried to get Paul to come with me and get some super duper logs for his fire, but no, this was just asking too much. So fine, I'll go twice a week, once to get my super duper log and once to get his super duper log. So much pressure. But pressure is what a fire is all about. Science, right? I often felt a lot of guilt for not having the perfect fire. I tried more coal, more super duper logs. Nope, not big enough, not hot enough, not bright enough, not enough. So now kids, 6 fires to keep going. Some of the kids bought into the fire building business on their own. They ignited their own flames and mostly threw in their own logs. One of them even threw in diesel for 2 years. Oh, proud mama moment. My blessing baby loved building fires. He loved it so much he would go to the wilderness with strange men and spend weeks lighting fires. He was so good at it, 2 summers they paid him to be the fire master. But apparently fires should not be built in rainbow colors, so they kicked him out of the fire building business. That's messed up. God loves everyone. Ask Precious Moments. It's okay though, he had already figured out fire building was a waste of time. He's much more happy now and much more fun. I tried really hard. I even nagged my oldest kid about the importance of logs, but for some reason he never found fire building important. He said he was warm and he could find his way without firelight. Could this be? Was I a failure? Then one day I was exhausted from all this fire building. I needed Paul to just go with me to the super duper sacred not secret place and get his own damn super duper log. He didn't have to throw it in the fire, he just needed to pick it up, because if he didn't go with me, I would have to ask another man to go with me to the super duper sacred not secret place, and that would just be weird. I promised I wouldn't make him ever go again. And then I saw his pain. Fire building hurt Paul. Not only did he not like fires, it actually caused him physical pain. It seared his soul. Wait, I thought, stop. Okay, I'll listen. Paul told me all about fires. Fires trick your brain into thinking you can't live without them. But you really don't need them. He showed me how the world was bright, warm, and beautiful when you step back from the fire. He showed me the wonderful, brave people who were living and loving without fires. He really had left the fire long ago, but he was still in the bright. Could this be? No fires? Wow, who knew? I stepped back from my fire, and sure enough, he was right. I found out for myself. The world is shining, brilliant, dazzling, radiant, vibrant. All without a fire. I love my life without fire building. I'm discovering who I am inside. I'm getting through the stages of grief and regret with the help of some really amazing ladies. I'm living for today because that's all there is, although no one really knows. And here I am, 3 years later, living an amazing life without wasting more time, money, and effort keeping fires going. Oh, every once in a while I go with my parents and sibling and throw a log on their fires. It's okay. They're obsessed with fire building and I love them. Fires are still really important to 2 of my kids, but not more important than family. They're going to be okay. They know a fire once destroyed our house, but it can't destroy our love.
That was a great old listener essay from Infants on Thrones, newly resurrected to stand before the judgment bar of, well, maybe not a judgment bar, but perhaps a sympathetic nervous system review, rigorously analyzed by an AI puppet show, no less. Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. So our mission today, it's quite something. We're taking this really profound, deeply human, and very metaphorical, personal essay. It's called Fire Building, about faith, spiritual labor, the whole works. And we're going to run it through, several layers of analysis. We're talking psychosocial summary, looking at maybe some temporary clinical diagnoses, diving deep into the neuroscience, even touching on evolutionary psychology. It's a lot to unpack. So just to recap the core story for you. The client's life is built around this central metaphor, keeping the fire burning, not just for herself, but for her father, the bishop, who needed these huge logs. For her mother, this sort of relentlessly cheerful igniter. For her husband, Paul, whose fire was kind of smoldering. And then eventually for their 6 kids, it's a powerful picture, really, of this lifelong, very gendered spiritual overfunctioning, decades of it.
Yeah, and that's why this deep dive is so important. I think we're not just talking about changing beliefs here. We're investigating the cost, the real physical cost of what you might call performative faith. It's more than just a story. It's almost like a clinical map, showing how that kind of chronic self-sacrifice, it physically reorganizes you, your nervous system. So the big question we're asking is, what actually happens inside the body? the muscles, hormones, the brain, when things like safety, love, even holiness get tangled up with just chronic exhaustion and this relentless spiritual labor.
Okay, let's start digging into that fire building metaphor then. Right at the beginning, there's this mix of pride and, well, performance anxiety, isn't there? She gets chosen for Beehive president at 12. And that little quote, "I must have been just a hair bit better than her." Wow, that feels pretty significant.
Oh, it's huge. That single sentence right there, it basically lays out the blueprint for the next, 40 years? It instantly connects the spiritual work, tending that fire, with getting praise from outside, with being seen as better than someone else. So the fire, you see, it wasn't just about her inner feelings or beliefs. It was this public yardstick, a measure of goodness, maybe even superiority. And the praise she got for it, it felt warm. And that warmth, neurologically, gets fused, hardwired to the act of service itself.
So if you stop doing the work,
You lose the warmth, you lose the validation, and suddenly the world probably feels cold, maybe even dangerous, not safe.
and the role models she had, her parents, they just seemed to pour fuel on this fire, pardon the pun, the father, the bishop. He modeled this intense spirituality, but also just sheer physical exhaustion.
Yeah.
Throwing this enormous burn all-night log on the fire at 5 a.m. for his meetings. And the result, he's dead to the world every night, collapsed.
It's a textbook example, isn't it? Spiritual effort disguised as, or maybe conflated with, total dedication leading to burnout. That enormous log, it symbolizes these huge, probably unsustainable commitments, and his collapse afterwards. That's a body signal, a somatic protest, really. The body's just refusing to keep pace with the demands of that role.
But then when he senses her maybe slacking off,
Right. His daddy's spidey sense tingles, as she puts it. And then he talks for hours about how vital the fire is, how it's the only way you will make it in the cold, dark world. So the lesson becomes, exhaustion isn't a warning sign, it's proof of piety. If you're not drained, you're not doing enough. Precisely.
Yeah.
That's the implicit teaching. And then you add the mother's example on top of that, which in its own way was maybe even more demanding because it was all wrapped up in this cheerful package.
the glowing, bright, yellow, cheerful, crackling fire. That description just screams performative warmth, doesn't it?
It really does. Her whole life, according to the essay, was about igniting flames in other people. Visiting teaching, Girls' Camp, Relief Society, constant output. She wasn't just keeping herself warm. She was like this aggressive, perpetual co-regulator for the whole community.
And that sets up this specific gendered expectation, right? It's not enough to just do the work.
You have to do it cheerfully. You have to look happy while you're doing it. The mother's crackling fire is the visible energy, the performance of someone whose whole identity is wrapped up in serving others. So the standard set for the client is impossibly high. True holiness means constant, visible, joyful overfunctioning, no matter what it's actually costing you inside. You got to smile while you're heaving those enormous logs.
Okay, so fast forward to marriage. Fire building became big business. That line says it all. She marries Paul, and she says she didn't realize his fire was just smoldering. And suddenly, boom, she's managing 2 fires. Then kids, yikes, the workload just explodes. She talks about having to throw heavy logs across a distance onto his fire.
That image, throwing the log across a distance, it's so vivid. It captures the emotional gap, maybe the spiritual gap between them, and this immediate burden she takes on as the primary spiritual engine for the family. And notice the physical toll. She literally says her muscles growing weak from the effort. This wasn't just metaphorical labor. It was physically draining.
Right. And getting the fuel involved, actual, ritual. Going to the super-duper sacred, not secret place for the super-duper logs. Temple attendance, maybe high-level church duties.
Seems likely. And the key part is she had to go twice. Once for her own fire, once for Paul's.
Doubling the load.
Yeah, it perfectly illustrates that dynamic of spiritual codependency and overfunctioning. She becomes the spiritual lifeline, and likely driven by fear, right? Fear that if his fire goes out, the whole family structure collapses, maybe even their eternal salvation. The pressure is just immense. Constant hypervigilance, constant sympathetic nervous system activation.
And we can't forget the coal, the financial piece, tithing. 10% pre-tax for that long-lasting heat. She kept paying it, even when Paul disagreed, because she needed to save up in case something bad happened.
It really shows how everything, physical energy, emotional labor, finances, it all gets sucked into supporting these religious demands. And that structure, it doesn't tolerate deviation well.
Which brings us to the son, the unconventional fire builder.
Ah, yes. The one who threw in diesel for 2 years was actually paid as a fire master. Good at it, apparently.
That got kicked out of the fire building business. Why? Because fires should not be built in rainbow colors. I mean, talk about institutional rigidity. That's the system basically saying, we don't care about your enthusiasm, your skill, even your dedication. What we care about is conformity.
The heat you produce has to be the approved kind, the approved color. Anything authentic that steps outside that narrow band of the rainbow colors gets rejected, cast out. And you can imagine seeing that happen to her son probably reinforced her own fear of straying.
But it's this rigidity, this pain, that eventually leads to the turning point. She finally sees that the fire actually hurts Paul, causes him physical pain, sears his soul. What was his big insight?
Paul's line's the catalyst, the moment of cognitive diffusion for her. He tells her the fire tricks your brain into thinking you need them. He already found his own way out. He was in the bright. As she says, that statement directly challenges her lifelong core belief that light, warmth, safety, they only come through this back-breaking effort and sacrifice.
And so when she finally gives herself permission to step back from her own fire, to let it dim, what does she find? This massive paradigm shift. Her realization, the world is shining, brilliant, dazzling, radiant, vibrant, all without a fire.
Wow. Yeah, that's the move from, like, duty-bound darkness avoidance, always fighting the cold, to presence-based joy. Realizing the light wasn't something she had to manufacture through sheer will. It was just there. The baseline reality of the world waiting for how to notice. And that's where you get this complex mix, right? Psychological grief over everything lost, but also this ecstatic, authentic sense of liberation.
Okay, so we've traced the narrative arc. Now let's put on our clinical hats. Applying that framework is crucial for really understanding what's going on and how you'd approach this therapeutically.
Absolutely. We need to move past the metaphor, powerful as it is, and structure this properly. Let's start with a biopsychosocial summary.
Okay. Biologically, what are we seeing? An adult woman reporting decades of, well, chronic systemic fatigue. That line about muscle weakness, difficulty throwing logs, it's not just literary flair, is it?
No, not at all. It strongly suggests genuine physical depletion, likely psychosomatic fatigue, maybe linked to long-term depression, or certainly a chronic stress disorder impacting her physical health. Her body was keeping score.
And psychologically, it sounds incredibly complex.
It is. You've got classic signs pointing towards religious trauma. Things like intense guilt, performance anxiety that sounds debilitating, and deep emotional exhaustion from that constant spiritual role strain. Then there's the transition itself. That requires huge cognitive restructuring. She has to basically redefine everything. Goodness, family, her purpose in life. And emotionally, it's this messy mix of intense grief and loss, mourning the system she cherished, but tangled up with this really powerful sense of empowerment and self-acceptance as she starts finding her authentic self.
Socially, she was deeply, deeply embedded in this high-demand faith community, what you'd call enmeshed.
Right. And the transition creates this acute role conflict. Her inner need for authenticity is crashing head-on into those ingrained roles, perfect wife, perfect mother, and the family's loyalty to the religious community. But there's a positive sign too, right? She eventually collaborates with Paul, they find their way together, and she mentions building an emerging peer support network. That suggests a positive social path forward, post-deconstruction. So, boiling it down, the presenting problem is this: profound exhaustion, grappling with identity loss, mourning the loss of certainty, and searching for a new sense of purpose, now coming from within instead of from an external rule book. That sums it up nicely. Okay, let's talk temporary diagnosis options using the DSM-5-TR. You mentioned starting with the Z code, Z55.4 discord with spiritual beliefs. Why is starting there so important rather than jumping straight to a disorder? That's a fantastic point, and it's really key to culturally sensitive and ethical practice. The Z code is crucial because it acknowledges that the source of the distress is situational and external. It's not inherently a sign of pathology within her. Her questioning, reevaluating, or even rejecting her belief system is a legitimate, understandable source of major life stress. But the process itself isn't a mental disorder. Using the Z code frames her struggle respectfully as a spiritual and social transition, not as some kind of internal failing.
Okay, that makes sense. But the emotional toll is undeniable. So the next consideration might be a 43.8 adjustment disorder, maybe with mixed anxiety and depressed mood.
Yes, adjustment disorder fits very well for the acute distress experienced during that massive life upheaval of deconstruction. The emotional fatigue she describes, the guilt, the confusion about her role, those are classic symptoms when someone's system is struggling to adapt to such a huge change in their external world. It captures that temporary period of significant distress.
And then there's the concept of moral injury, coded as R45.851. Now, we often hear this term in relation to combat veterans. How does it apply here in a religious context?
That's a great question. Moral injury isn't limited to military contexts. It refers to the profound psychological distress that occurs when someone perpetrates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that deeply violate their own moral beliefs and ethical code. So for this client, think about it. She devoted her entire life, her energy, her resources based on the promises and structure of this institution. Then she comes to realize that the system itself caused harm, physical pain to her husband, maybe emotional harm to her son with the Rainbow Fire incident, and certainly deep exhaustion and depletion in herself. That realization that the rules and demands of the system were prioritized over genuine care, love, or maybe ethical consistency that constitutes a deep betrayal. It shatters the fundamental trust between her and the institution she served. That rupture, that disillusionment is the core of moral injury. Okay, so we have a sense of the what. Now, the how. How do you even begin to approach treating a lifetime of this kind of deeply ingrained spiritual service and the resulting fallout? Let's talk theoretical frameworks for treatment. First up, feminist therapy. Yeah, feminist therapy has to be front and center here. The entire narrative is steeped in gendered expectations. This lens helps validate her experience of shouldering extreme emotional labor, the pressure of internalized perfectionism, and the way spiritual overfunctioning is often demanded of women within patriarchal systems. We use it to help her see those expectations as external cultural forces, not personal failings. And then, crucially, to help her define her sense of self and worth outside of those restrictive roles like wife and firekeeper.
Then, shifting gears slightly, existential therapy. Why bring that in when she's just lost her main source of meaning? Seems counterintuitive, maybe.
Well, that loss is precisely why it's relevant. Losing the religious framework throws her right into what existentialists call the existential vacuum. Suddenly, she's confronted with the enormous, maybe terrifying reality of freedom, choice, and the responsibility of creating her own meaning without a divine rulebook. Existential therapy helps her navigate the anxiety that comes with that freedom. It encourages her to embrace authenticity over conformity, to find meaning through her own values and actions, not through obeying external dictates. It's about helping her build a new personal philosophy, essentially from scratch.
And given the incredibly rich imagery in her story, narrative therapy feels like a perfect fit.
Oh, absolutely. It's tailor-made. Narrative therapy works directly with that powerful fire metaphor. The goal is to help her reauthor her story. We help her externalize the problems, the demanding fire, the heavy logs, the fear of the cold world. See them not as parts of her, but as cultural narratives imposed on her. Then she can actively rewrite her identity, shifting from the tireless firekeeper burdened by duty to the autonomous, radiant self who discovered the world was already bright. It's the clinical work of embodying that shining, brilliant world she found. And finally, something absolutely essential, grief counseling. Non-negotiable. She's experiencing profound, ambiguous loss. She's lost her spiritual identity, her community, the certainty she once had, her vision of the future. These are real, significant losses. And it's complicated because this grief exists alongside the relief and joy of her newfound freedom. Therapy absolutely must provide a safe container for her to mourn what she's lost, without judgment and without having that grief minimized just because she's also feeling liberated. We have to validate both the sorrow and the success simultaneously.
Okay, let's get practical. Moving from theory to action. What specific interventions and rationales would a therapist actually use with someone like this client?
Well, building on the feminist framework, a core intervention would be feminist role analysis. The rationale is to systematically unpack how those prescribed roles, spiritual wife, firekeeper, good mother, limited her autonomy and fostered that internalized sense of oppression or not enoughness. You'd literally map it out in session. What were the expectations of these roles? What was the reality? How did gender assumptions shape them? It makes the invisible visible.
And working directly with the metaphor itself, narrative metaphor exploration, what does that look like?
It means using her own language as the doorway. Asking things like, you described throwing Paul's log across a distance. Can you tell me more about the weight of that log emotionally? Or, where did you feel the pressure of your father's enormous burn all-night log in your body? This helps translate that abstract sense of spiritual burden into concrete, felt experiences. The logs, the heat, the fear of cold, they become tangible bridges to understanding the sheer emotional and, frankly, physical labor involved. Then there's the crucial step of just naming the experience. Psychoeducation on religious trauma and burnout. Yes, this is about giving her language and validation. For decades, she likely believed her exhaustion and guilt were signs of her own inadequacy or spiritual failing. Learning about concepts like religious trauma syndrome, RTS, or spiritual burnout helps shift the frame. It helps her understand that her responses were normal reactions to an abnormal high-demand environment. That can be incredibly relieving. It externalizes the blame from herself to the system, reducing shame and self-criticism.
And looking forward, as she steps into this new, radiant way of being, values clarification exercises seem vital.
Absolute paramount. She needs a new internal compass now that the external one is gone. So we work with her to identify and define her core values now. If obedience was a key value before, what replaces it? Authenticity, connection, joy, peace. These exercises help her build a clear, personally meaningful, non-religiously mandated definition of purpose. We ask, what does radiance look like for you practically, day to day? Is it setting a boundary? Is it prioritizing 15 minutes of quiet? This provides concrete anchors for her new way of living.
This case really illuminates so many important clinical themes. Let's highlight a few. First, the sheer intensity of religious burnout and gendered emotional labor.
Yeah, this story is a stark illustration of how faith and gender norms can intersect to create immense pressure, especially for women in high-demand systems. That expectation to manage everyone else's spiritual and emotional well-being, the husband's fire, the kids' fires, the community's needs, it's relentless. Her exhaustion wasn't just a side effect, it was almost structurally required to keep the whole system running. And the tragedy is mistaking that utter depletion for spiritual success or holiness.
It also beautifully frames a faith crisis as a developmental milestone.
Right. Her journey really parallels James Fowler's stage 4 of faith development, the individuative reflective stage. This is where an individual moves beyond simply inheriting beliefs and starts to critically examine them, taking personal responsibility for their own values and commitments. It's often a painful, disorienting process, shedding the comfort of the group's certainty for the complexity of individual conviction. But it's a necessary step towards mature adult psychological and spiritual development for many people.
And the outcome here, her description of the world as shining, brilliant, points towards symbolic liberation and joyful deconstruction.
Exactly. That language signifies more than just relief. It suggests post-traumatic growth. She didn't just survive the crisis. She emerged on the other side with a new, perhaps even heightened, appreciation for life, authenticity, and simple presence. She's moving beyond just coping with the loss to actually thriving in her new, self-authored identity.
This is gold for students and clinicians. Let's list some key NCE concepts for study that this case brings to life. We've hit Fowler's stages and the need to understand patriarchal religious structures and religious trauma.
Definitely. We also see clear links to Erikson's stages, particularly generativity versus stagnation. Her previous identity was deeply rooted in generativity, contributing to the next generation, the community, but defined entirely through selfless service within that specific religious framework. Her therapeutic task now involves finding new, sustainable ways to be generative, ways to contribute that align with her authentic self and don't require self-depletion. How does she contribute now, without burning out?
And we keep coming back to cultural sensitivity and the ethical imperative of using Z codes appropriately, diagnosing the distress without pathologizing the identity shift itself.
Crucial, which leads to some recommended resources for students. Beyond the DSM, understanding complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, is often very relevant here. Chronic exposure to high-demand, high-control environments can lead to the kinds of pervasive relational trauma patterns seen in CPTSD rather than single-incident PTSD. Also, grounding in systemic family therapy principles is invaluable. You need to understand how her role as firekeeper wasn't just personal. It served a function in maintaining the entire family system's equilibrium, its spiritual homeostasis, however dysfunctional.
Okay, now for the part that really reframes everything, the deep dive into the mind-body connection.
Right.
This is where we make the radical, but I believe essential, shift. Her exhaustion, the weak muscles, the inability to throw the log. It wasn't just a metaphor. We need the therapist's educational commentary. Religious burnout as physiological bondage. Her body was literally breaking down under the strain. It's powerful because we often associate deep faith with strength, resilience, but you're saying those decades of fire building were actually her nervous system stuck in overdrive, like a low-grade chronic fight-or-flight response disguised as devotion.
Precisely that. Let's look at it through the polyvagal perspective. All that constant striving, worrying about Paul's fire, checking on the kids' flames, meeting the bishop's expectations, it kept her sympathetic nervous system perpetually activated. Think of it as a low-level, continuous state of perceived threat. The cold, dark world she was warned about was the danger signal. Every prayer offered out of obligation, every meeting attended with anxiety, every act of service performed under duress, each one registered in her body as the demand requiring vigilance, mobilization. Her nervous system interpreted spiritual duties as survival threats.
So the devotion felt like hard work because it literally was an energetic battle inside her body. What about her mother, though? The cheerful, crackling fire that seems so positive, so regulated on the surface.
But that's where we see textbook pseudo-safety. Polyvagal theory helps us understand the fawn response. This is a defense mechanism where the nervous system tries to ensure safety not through fighting or fleeing, but through appeasing the perceived threat, in this case, the social expectations. She maintained the appearance of ventral vagal safety, smiling, engaging, being helpful and warm, but internally the system was likely highly anxious, overextended. It was prioritizing external harmony, looking regulated over genuine internal well-being. It's a performance of safety, and it's incredibly draining to maintain long-term.
And the eventual burnout. The muscles growing weak. That's the system finally collapsing under the weight of it all. That's the profound ancient intelligence of the body stepping in. It's the dorsal vagal system initiating a forced shutdown. When the sympathetic system has been running on fumes for decades, pushed beyond its limits, the body shifts into its most extreme energy conservation mode. Immobilization, depletion, profound fatigue, sometimes even dissociation or feeling numb.
Her body was essentially saying, I can't sustain this alert state any longer. I have to play dead to survive. No more logs. This collapse, which is so often tragically misinterpreted by the individual and the community as laziness, depression, or a lack of faith, is actually the body's desperate last-ditch effort at self-preservation.
Let's connect this to the chemistry, the psychoneuroimmunology, PNI, linkage. If she's in chronic fight-or-flight fawn, what's happening hormonally?
Imagine an internal alarm system that's constantly buzzing, never fully switching off. That chronic religious guilt, the role strain, the hypervigilance about everyone's spiritual state, it keeps cortisol levels persistently elevated. Now, cortisol is great for short-term crises, but long-term, it's corrosive. It suppresses the immune system, making you more vulnerable to illness. It hinders cellular repair. It directly contributes to the kind of deep fatigue, muscle aches, and even brain fog she described. Her body was essentially trying to run a marathon 24/7 while simultaneously having its defenses lowered, all because the emotional and spiritual demands kept the biochemical fear response churning.
Which explains why just getting more sleep wouldn't fix the deep exhaustion. The underlying chemical state was still one of high alert.
Exactly. Healing requires reestablishing genuine safety at the nervous system level, which allows the parasympathetic system to come back online. It's not just about hours slept. We also have to consider the neuroscience of caregiving here. Her brain was actually getting rewarded for this self-destructive cycle.
How so? You mean the praise she got, the warmth she felt when she succeeded?
Precisely. The oxytocin-dopamine circuitry, the brain's reward pathway normally associated with bonding, connection, and nurturing, got hijacked. It became linked not to authentic connection, but to obligation and institutional compliance. The external praise, the sense of belonging she got for keeping the fires burning, reinforced a powerful dopamine loop. It essentially trained her brain to associate the stress and effort of self-sacrifice with the reward of social approval. You could almost call it a socially sanctioned addiction to meeting external demands, even at great personal cost.
So leaving the system that provided those rewards would naturally trigger a kind of withdrawal. Intense anxiety, guilt.
Absolutely. The brain panics when that familiar, albeit harmful reward source is threatened or removed. That's part of the deep difficulty in leaving high-demand groups.
How can someone, or a therapist working with them, spot the lingering effects? What are the somatic signposts, the red flags, that tell you the nervous system is still stuck in that dysregulated pattern, even after leaving the environment?
There are several key things to look for. A big one is the inability to rest without feeling guilty or anxious. The system still believes danger is present if you're not doing or producing. Another is minimizing pain through cheerful positivity, that lingering, crackling fire, fawn response, trying to manage others' perceptions even when you're suffering inside.
What about still feeling responsible for everyone else?
That's a huge indicator of ongoing hypervigilance and maybe unresolved codependent patterns. The nervous system is still scanning habitually for signs that others are cold or in danger, feeling compelled to jump in and fix things to feel safe or worthy. And of course, chronic fatigue that persists despite adequate rest often signals that the long-term cortisol imbalance hasn't resolved. The body's chemistry is still prioritizing survival over deep restoration and repair.
So bringing it back to her breakthrough moment, seeing the world as shining, brilliant, dazzling, radiant, this wasn't just a philosophical shift in perspective.
Not at all. It's healing as embodied enlightenment. That description, that feeling state, It signals a fundamental nervous system pivot. She moved from the compulsive doing driven by the sympathetic agdorsal systems into a state of restorative being, rooted in the safety and connection of the ventral vagal state. She's experiencing, perhaps for the first time in decades, what baseline physiological coherence feels like. The spontaneous ease, the capacity for joy, the sense of safety that arises naturally when the body finally trusts that it doesn't have to perform or fight to survive. It's the nervous system coming home to itself.
Okay, let's integrate all these layers now. Our clinical integration summary. We need that multi-lens approach to really help someone navigate this.
Definitely. So from the polyvagal lens, the therapeutic focus is heavily on body literacy, teaching her to recognize her own nervous system states, sympathetic activation, dorsal shutdown, ventral safety, prioritizing practices that promote regulation and genuine rest, framing rest not as failure, but as essential biological need, helping her cultivate internal sources of safety rather than seeking external validation.
And the feminist lens provides the framework for crucial work on boundaries, assertive communication, and dismantling those internalized patriarchal messages that demanded the spiritual overfunctioning in the first place, reclaiming her right to her own energy and needs.
While the narrative lens gives her the tools and language to actively restory her life, moving from a narrative defined by duty, obligation, and perhaps victimization by the system, to one centered on personal strength, resilience, emerging authenticity, and self-discovery. This integrated approach ensures we're addressing the physical reality in her body, the social and historical context she came from, and her current psychological experience and future aspirations. So to answer the crucial question, how can therapy help someone with this kind of experience? What's the real potential here? Therapy provides that vital integration. It helps connect the dots between the abstract theological concepts she lived by and the concrete physiological stress they created. It empowers her to define a new identity on her own terms. Crucially, it holds space for the complex, legitimate grief that accompanies leaving behind an entire world, an entire belief system, even if that system was harmful. It guides her away from self-blame through self-compassion and validates her journey towards authenticity and joy. And for listeners who might recognize parts of this story in themselves or someone they know, when should someone with a history like this seek therapy? What are the signals? Seek therapy when you recognize those signs of chronic nervous system activation. The pervasive guilt that stops you from resting. The feeling that you're only safe or worthy when you're performing for others. The deep ache of moral injury or betrayal. If you're wrestling with severe role conflict after leaving a high-demand group, or if the grief and disorientation feel overwhelming and persistent, that's your body and mind asking for support. Don't ignore persistent fatigue, muscle weakness, or brain fog. View these not as personal failings, but as physiological signals demanding attention. The body is asking for help to rewire itself away from that state of bondage and towards genuine regulation and well-being. Let's land this clinical piece with our therapeutic reflection, which really captures the essence of this transformation.
For years, she tended everyone else's fire, mistaking exhaustion for holiness. Her healing began when she discovered that light can come from within. It powerfully reaffirms that religious burnout isn't just emotional. It's physiological bondage, often masked, tragically, as piety.
Beautifully put. And that leads us perfectly into our final, more philosophical exploration, drawing from the Infants on Thrones source material that framed the original essay. We're going to take this individual healing journey and connect it way, way back.
Back to the very origins of life. You're talking about tracing ancestry beyond names on a family tree. Back to Lucier, the last universal common ancestor of all life on Earth.
Exactly. It's a way of contextualizing her nervous system recovery within the grand sweep of evolution. The idea presented is that Lucier, that first common ancestor, existed in a state of open conversation with its environment. Life at its core was porous, communal, based on successful cooperation and exchange.
So the nervous system we inherit today isn't just ours, it's an archive, a record of billions of years of successful cooperation.
That's the perspective. Our nervous system is the biological throne upon which human awareness sits. It's been built up, layer by ancient layer, designed fundamentally to assess safety, navigate threats, and facilitate connection, because cooperation is what ultimately worked for survival. The client's struggle from this viewpoint was that her modern cultural conditioning, the high-demand religious system, forced her ancient nervous system, that throne, into a state of isolation, hypervigilance, and perpetual internal conflict, overriding its innate drive for connection and safety.
And sitting on this ancient throne, making sense of it all, is the infant mind. What does that refer to?
The infant mind, in this metaphor, represents the newest parts of our brain, the neocortex, our capacity for complex thought, language, self-reflection, the default mode network. It's the part that can create elaborate stories, like the fire metaphor itself. It's also the part capable of intense self-criticism, comparison, a hair bit better, and getting lost in abstract worries. This infant part is still learning, evolutionarily speaking, how to integrate its powerful cognitive abilities with the deep embodied wisdom of the ancient nervous system, the throne.
So the client's awakening, her finding the radiant world, is like this infant mind finally maturing, learning to listen to the body.
That's a great way to put it. And we can see this maturation process mirrored beautifully in the core principles of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, even though she wasn't explicitly using ACT. First, acceptance. She had to stop fighting the fatigue, the grief, the discomfort. She had to allow those difficult internal experiences to be there without judging herself for having them. Accepting the pain was part of healing.
Then diffusion, seeing thoughts for what they are, just thoughts.
Exactly. She had to learn to step back from those self-critical thoughts. I'm not doing enough. I'm failing Paul. The world is cold and dark without the fire. To see them not as absolute truths demanding obedience, but as old mental habits, echoes of the cultural programming, attempts by the infant mind to control the uncontrollable, just words passing through.
And the turning point often comes with present moment awareness.
Yes. Shifting attention away from the noisy, often critical, internal dialogue and back to the direct experience of the senses. She stopped thinking about the fire and started noticing the actual light in the world around her, the shining, brilliant, dazzling reality that was always there beneath the struggle. This grounds the infant mind in the body's present experience.
And finally, clarifying values and taking committed action.
Right. Once fused from the old rules, she could consciously choose what truly mattered to her. Now, authenticity, connection, peace, perhaps. And then take steps, however small, aligned with those values. Choosing rest over obligation, choosing connection with Paul over maintaining a facade. Actions based on internal guidance, not external fear.
So the final synthesis here is really profound. Her discovery of the radiant world wasn't just a nice feeling. It was her nervous system, literally remembering its baseline state, its evolutionary birthright of coherence and safety.
That's the deepest layer of interpretation. It's the ventral vagal state, re-emerging after being suppressed for decades by the demands of the fire. She wasn't rejecting the idea of light or warmth. She was evolving beyond the compulsive need to perform the tending of it. She was allowing her own innate ancestral capacity for regulation and connection, her own inner light, to finally shine through autonomously.
Her personal journey becomes this microcosm of a larger evolutionary story. Reclaiming autonomy isn't just psychological, it's physiological, a return to a more ancient, sustainable way of being.
It's the most ancient part of her, the biological throne, finally signaling that it feels safe enough to rest, connect, and just be.
So the journey from that kind of spiritual overfunctioning to finding genuine radiance, it's really a profound act of reclaiming your own biology, your own nervous system, a deeply evolved form of self-regulation that honors the wisdom held right there in your own body.
And perhaps when we learn to truly integrate the wisdom of the body, that ancient throne, with the reflective capacity of the mind, the maturing infant, we start to understand that individual healing is deeply connected to life's fundamental drive towards connection and cooperation. And maybe that's what it means for us all to be infants on thrones.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.